What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. Now in this one, I'm going to show you guys how to build an awesome 1440p gaming PC build with a sleek all-white colour scheme that shouldn't break the bank. A system that's going to be equally fantastic for playing those harder to run AAA titles and easier to run FPS games like Apex, Valorant and Fortnite at that crucial 1440p resolution, giving you a lot more detail and visual fidelity than 1080p, but without the massive performance overhead of 4K gaming. I'm going to run you through all the parts that I've picked and why, including some alternative recommendations if you fancy them, walking through how to put the system together and looking at those all-important frame rate numbers in a wide variety of titles a little bit later on. Let's do this. Take your build to the next level with Apacer's sleek RGB DDR5 memory. Available with a wide range of speeds and capacities, the Apacer Panther lineup has a kit for everyone. A great looking aluminium alloy heatsink offers excellent heat dissipation, while Intel XMP 3.0 and AMD Expo certification means this RAM is a great fit for Team Red and Team Blue systems. Plus, RGB support in Asus, GeekaWhat, MSI and ASRock software suites makes this an easy addition to any build. Learn more at the first link in the description below. I'm going to kick this video off by walking through all the parts I chose for this build and why, and start a little bit unusually with the case. Now this is the Phantek G400A, and Phanteks are a brand this year that have really shot up my radar. From builds inside of their NV5, their XT View, and now this, which is the newest version from their more entry-level case lineup, I've been very impressed so far. Now in a world where every case seems to be a fish tank PC case, we have a normal PC case. Yes! Celebratory noises. And actually, what they seem to have done in this form factor is quite clever. You get mesh ventilation down the bottom here and plenty of mesh ventilation above the PSU, handy cable routing options, support for those stealthy BTF reverse connector motherboards. The front is of course all mesh as well, which is going to give you some of the best airflow and cooling of basically any case on the market. You can see behind the pre-included and really easy to remove magnetic dust filter. You get 340mm fans, and the plastic mold in here is even been designed to channel the air through those fans and give you the best cooling performance possible. As with any Phantek chassis, the build quality feels really fantastic. This isn't the most expensive case in the world and there's very minimal panel flex. The rear I'm sure will be the same, captive thumb screws on the top and the bottom. Even little features like vents at the bottom here for even more airflow. Attention to detail is great as well. Even things like the front panel cables are fully white, including the ends of the cables. This is something I see other white chassis really, well, get wrong. Up top, you've got USB-C, Type A, you've got an RGB control, which could also be used, I guess, as a reset button, and of course, your power button. And as well as three 140mm at the front, you get a 140mm fan in the rear, also RGB and nicely controllable, and it comes with these nice little clips that you'll see on Phantek's higher-end fans for hiding the screw holes, which is a really small touch, but something which is great from an attention to detail standpoint. Phantek's new NextLink software is also going to allow you to control RGB on not only the case LED strip, but the fans as well. And I actually thought the software was fairly easy to use. The UI a little basic, but it does the job nicely. We'll end up reviewing this case in full over on our website, I'm sure, so go and check that out in the cards section now. Inside of the case, I'm going to be placing some pretty nice hardware. I've got this Ryzen 5 chip for today's build, but in truth, there's a few options on the CPU front. The 9600X was too expensive when it launched, but is now fast approaching price parity with the 7600 and 7600X. If that's the case, go with AMD's newest CPU, but just keep an eye on pricing information generally. Any of AMD's Ryzen 5 chips with 6 cores and 12 threads that support the AM5 platform are going to be what I'd recommend you pick up for this build. Sadly, Intel are pretty much nowhere to be seen, which basically counts them out entirely. Talking of nowhere to be seen, the graphics card for today's build, you're going to have to imagine the RX 7800 XT from Sapphire in white that I've ordered for this system. It's hopefully arriving in about an hour's time, so by the time we get to that stage of the build, it should be here. That's going to provide awesome 1440p performance, and is one of the very few 7800 XT designs I've seen in this nice white colorway. Fun fact, I actually tried to pick up a 7900 GRE in white over the Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales and failed miserably. Yeah, complete and utter fail, couldn't get one. But if you can, that would also be a good substitution for this build. It will give you some more performance at 1440p and a little bit of performance at 4K2 for around about $80 to $100 more money. In terms of the other components, let's look at RAM and SSD next up. A 1TB Crucial P3 Plus keeps things nice and simple, very reliable, good Gen 4 speeds, really not a bad drive. Pick up whatever capacity you fancy for your build, doesn't make any difference, other than giving you obviously, well, more storage. And G-Skill's Ripjaws M5 RGB is the perfect RAM kit for this system. This particular kit right here is a 6000 megahertz kit with a CL30. CL30's the latency of the memory. It's all good and well having a high-speed kit with a crap latency, and you're still going to see a big performance drop-off. Let's talk next about the motherboard. Nice. Smooth. This is the GeekaWhat B650 Aorus Elite AX Ice. Basically, it's GeekaWhat's lovely, beautiful, white-themed B650 motherboard. Now, of course, in any gaming PC build, you can always spend that bit more money, and if you did want to do so, you might want to consider this, which looks basically identical, pretty much identical. It's the stealth version of the Aorus lineup. This actually has the rear connect motherboard functionality, which is going to slot through the cutouts on our case, giving you that really, really easy cable management and sleek cable-free aesthetic. The problem, going to cost you around another $80. Latest pricing and availability will, as always, be linked at the affiliate links in the description below. Now, alongside the case, Phantek's, at my request, also very handily sent out some extra fans, which we might pop down the bottom of the chassis, and their new Glacier One 360 M25 G2. Now, one thing that's cool about Phantek's is on their CPU coolers, they'll give you their nice high-end daisy-chainable, easy-to-connect fans. Other brands, naming no names, will send you the cooler, but not with their best fans on. And they do so at actually a pretty good price point. So shout out to Phantek for that. Again, talking of alternatives in this build, you could just chuck in a Hyper 212 Halo in white from Cooler Master or a Vetru V5, and you'll have fine cooling on that Ryzen CPU. But I like the extra airflow, think it's going to fill the build out really nicely. And with AM5's upgrade paths, having a slightly OP cooler isn't always a terrible thing. Now then, that's pretty much all the parts discussed. I've also got power supply, but we can chuck that in later and discuss that once pretty much everything else in the build is assembled. And I'm going to start, as always, by grabbing the motherboard, the SSD, the RAM, the CPU, and popping all of these together to build up the motherboard assembly outside of the case. First things first, line up the triangle on the CPU with the triangle on the motherboard socket. Secure this in, just to require a little bit of pressure. Add the RAM in to the second and fourth RAM DIMM slots for dual channel performance. And then finally, pop the crucial P3 Plus into the top NVMe slot on the motherboard. And don't forget to remove any thermal pads. Once that's all said and done, I'm then going to look at the CPU cooler and just see whether there is any prep that needs to be done when it comes to the CPU socket. It's easier to do this now once the cooler's in the case, basically. So we can see this should be white to be colour matched to the rest of the system. White it is indeed. Now, I also think potentially this has got, yes, it's got a fan underneath. I'm not sure if it's removable or not. I think the answer is no, but there is a fan under there, which is going to help with VRM cooling and some little air channels to actually cool around the VRMs, which is going to be good for CPU power delivery and overclocking. Then we have, that looks like the fans. Sometimes brands are starting to pre-install these. It looks like Phantek's have opted not to, but have actually pre-connected them all up together. And you can see they actually link with a screw this time, which is better than the old system. I did report one or two snapped on me before. So yes, Phantek's, I think this is a good improvement. Then we should have the radiator. Yes, we do. I don't know why I'm going into song, but we have a radiator. I promise not to sing ever again in any of our videos. Please don't unsubscribe. Gonna start calling me Susan Boyle. CPU cooler. Awful singing aside, you can actually see, yes, I need to remove the stock AMD brackets and add in Phantek standoffs instead. Again, I feel like I'm giving Phantek's a lot of praise. Really great instruction manual, A4, and it's in color. Everything's really easy to read, not easy to open, and you can actually see really clearly all the steps you've got to follow, which for me is great. They've even got little pro tips on there. How lovely. Get those CPU standoffs in on the motherboard, just make your life a little easier. Once those 4 standoffs are in, it's then a case of moving on to the motherboard standoff. So you want to check where the holes are on the board. You can see here there's 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 down the bottom. And you want to match these up to the 9 standoff locations in the case. I'm happy to report they're all pre-installed nice and easily for us in this instance. And the center one is raised, which will hold the motherboard in place while we screw it down. All the screws you need, by the way, for this come included in a little accessory bag inside the case itself. So look out for this and use these to secure the motherboard into place. Next stage is the CPU cooler. And you can see how this build is really starting to come together. Oh, there does actually appear to be a bit of a mark on this cooler. Should probably point that out. That's a bit not that nice. Might be able to clean that off with some isopropyl alcohol, but I've no idea where that's come from. So Phantek's may be worth having a look into. Now, I'm going to go probably for tubes at the front of the case, because it's also going to hide that mark. Nice. So that should fit. Oh, this could be tight. It fits. Of course it fits. We're never in doubt. However, I could do with putting the fans onto the radiator before putting the radiator. It's a very intimate camera angle, isn't it? The fans under the radiator first, getting that completed, then pop the rad on, and then add the water block. So fans on first, then radiator up to the top of the chassis, then the CPU water block onto the CPU. Yeah, then my arm will stop hurting from holding this radiator. Now, shall we talk about the power supply? Now, in truth, doesn't really matter what you get, with a few caveats. You want ATX3, preferably 3.1, you want the new high power 16-pin or 12 plus 4-pin Gen 5 power cable, and you want to get something with a good 80 plus certification and a fully modular interface. And this is the Phantek Amp GH850. Again, thanks to them, I asked them to send the case out and they were like, James, why not take a look at our new cooler and power supply too? And I said, you know what? Why not? So yeah, that's why I'm looking at it today. I don't think I've actually used this power supply in a build before, so quite excited to see what it's all about. Good to see you get all the cables as you might expect in this nice little branded Phantek's bag, although they're testing my scouting skills with this very complicated and severely advanced knotting. Ooh. You're hard. In here, you'll find all of the cables, which are then bagged again, but apart from these two, for some oh no, the bag's open. I was like, why would they just leave those out the bags? What's really nice about these is they are actually sleeves. They're nylon sleeves, which is really, really cool, rather than just being plastic sort of heat wrapped. So that's a motherboard power cable. We need a SATA power connector, a 4 plus 4 pin CPU, a 6 plus 2 pin PCI power cable. In fact, we're going to need 2 of those. This is, yep, one of those, and we're going to need probably as well another CPU power cable, just like so. If you're wondering which the GPU one is, it is this one here with all of the cables. This is what you're going to use for basically any GPU that's not a 78, 7900 GRE XT tier of GPU. So keep that handy for the future. And if you do go for an NVIDIA card in this system instead, you're going to need that cable. I'm also going to pop in, as I said earlier, a SATA power connection just for good measure for powering up any RGB hubs or fan controllers or anything along those lines. Let's go ahead, pop all of those into the power supply, screw that into the system, and we're ready for the final stage, which is the GPU. While I'm here, I'm also going to pop in some cheap white PSU extensions from Easy DIY Fab just to make the whole build match, and also plug in all the front panels, both the USB 3 Type A, the Type C, the JFP1, and of course the HD audio ports.
4 to 6 days later.
So it's here. It took way longer than I was expecting, so a few days have now passed, but let's see if it was worth the wait. And the answer to this question, well, I already know what the answer is. I've taken it out, and let me tell you, absolutely stoked is an understatement. It is an absolute piece of beauty. Look at that. I mean, come on. The backplate is gorgeous. It's got a little bit of red accenting. This does light up, but you can turn it on and off with the switch, not RGB. Fans are, oh, it's just absolutely glorious. 2 HDMIs and 2 display ports on the rear. And Sapphire also includes this, which is a very handy little vertical GPU support bracket, which you can screw in at the same time as installing the graphics card, just to help prop it up and stop the whole thing from sagging. So let me go ahead and pop that in. And once that's in, it's time to see how this build performs. But first, an epic GeekaWhat montage. I've got to say, I love how this looks, and waiting out for that white GPU was definitely the right call. So if you're going to build a white theme system and you're going for an AMD card, be patient, because I promise you it's worth it. Now let's take a look at performance, shall we, and start things off with a little bit of Call of Duty's Black Ops 6. At 1440p high, this system delivered around about 108 frames per second on average from our 7800 XT and 9600X combo. And as you can see, the gaming experience is really smooth visually at 1440p. I think the gameplay looks really fantastic, and CPU and GPU temperatures under control too, both in the 50 degrees region, between 50 and 60 from the low to the high end. Apex Legends is next up, and again at 1440p high settings, I think the game looks absolutely amazing, and frame rate wise, the results were really solid too. We managed to pull in well over 250 FPS, 256 on average to be precise. Apex and Fortnite for that matter, which I'll come on to shortly, are both games which really are optimized well for AMD GPUs, and this is why you see such strong results on a system like this. Talking of Fortnite, it's the only game today not tested at 1440p high, instead tested at 1080p competitive settings. Again, frame rates were really solid, this time nearer to 270 frames per second on average. And as you can see, very smooth, very playable experience, and on a high refresh rate monitor, you'd really be able to take advantage of all of that frame rate. Alan Wake 2 at 1440p high with no ray tracing enabled also provided some good results. A frame rate on average in and around 76 FPS, which I thought was perfectly playable. Ray tracing not as strong on AMD, but for rasterization, you're going to be pretty pleased. Hogwarts Legacy at 1440p high also broke through the triple-digit FPS barrier with 114 frames per second to be precise. One of the harder to run titles and very VRAM heavy. You can see here it's actually chewing up a full 8 gigabytes at 1440p, meaning some of those lower VRAM cards would very quickly start to bottleneck. Cyberpunk 2077 is next up, again a rasterization based result, and at 1440p high the build put in 108 frames per second, while the final title on my list today is a game that I personally love. That's basically the only reason it's on here, and at 1440p F1 2024 worked really well. Well over 200 FPS, closer to 300 frames per second on average. An easier to run title, I guess, but still brand new and AAA in many respects. So good to see it holding up here just quite so well in the benchmark mode. What do you guys think of this build? If you want to pick up any of the parts, they will be linked down below. You can buy lots of the systems featured here on the GeekaWhat channel as pre-builts from Geeka PC if you're based in the UK. And if you enjoyed this one, it'd be great to see you in the next video. So make sure you get subscribed and drop me a like rating for some good algorithm juice. And we'll see you in the next one.